but I don't have a button. All right. So, any new faces today?
My first time in this group. I've seen several folks around other meetings, but Mikey Bolt just joined the Cloud Native Buildpacks contrib team at VMware. So I'm excited to be here and dig in. It's my first week, so still kind of getting the wheels on, but looking forward to what's to come.
Awesome.
Yeah, this is Viraj. I just joined the Tanzu Build Service team. First week, excited to be here.
Awesome. Great to have both of you here. Anybody else? Any other folks who haven't shown up before? Seems like no. So we'll move on to.
I think we have one more person, Aiden, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sorry.
Hi, I'm Aiden. I work at Sambav in London, and yeah, it'll be fun to work with you all.
Awesome. Great to have you here as well. I think next thing on the agenda is release planning and updates.
I can give a quick update. I know pack 021 shipped yesterday. I think I saw that. On the lifecycle side, we shipped our release candidate last week, and now we're just waiting to get all of the features documented before we publish the final release. That'll be 012. 012, yeah.
Any updates on the platform side? Do we have anybody from the platform side here? And Javier just joins as I ask, so I'll give him 2 seconds. Hey Javier, can you give an update on the platform side this week?
Yeah, we just released Pack earlier this week, and so far everything seems to be going good. We do have basically the pipeline is broken for delivering what is it called, Arch Linux, but nobody's really complained yet, but we will be taking a look at that.
Awesome, joined at just the right time. Any other subteam updates, distribution learning, anything like that? Seems like no. So we will move on to our first agenda item, Sam, to expound on alternative proposal for exportable layers. Sam, you want to kick it off?
Yep. Let me find the right GitHub tab. I think I pushed the updates, yep. So I updated the proposal to move away from the whole volume directive back to something that a build pack can set. So in your build pack TOML, okay, first of all, the motivation and summary, the idea behind this RFC is to allow build packs to write to paths apart from /layers in the app directory, and for those paths to be exported out into the final image. This is useful for a bunch of cases which I've highlighted here, and it also allows you to, like, for build packs to write all these layers and still preserve the rebase capabilities while being able to write to other folder paths. the way I've currently structured it is that a build pack would declare that it needs to write to a certain fixed number of directories in its build pack toml. And when the builder is being created by a platform, it would validate that the build and run image do not have any conflicts on these paths, and also add a label on the builder for the build process to know which additional volumes to be mounted during build time. In terms of how this would work, during build time, the platform would look at this label, and if it finds any additional parts, it will try to mount volumes there. And the lifecycle would be responsible for taking the things there and putting it on the final run image. Buildpacks could also take advantage of slices the same way as they currently do with the app directory and specify like fine-grained parts in different layers if they want to. And additionally, the analysis phase would be responsible for validating that the list of exported directories is valid for the run image, and we are not overwriting any content that's there on the run image, and it's only empty folders that are being stacked on top of the run image. Drawbacks are additional complexity and like potential implementation complexity for platforms like Tecton. In terms of alternatives, there was one that Stephen proposed around the multiple app directories proposal, which we still need to flesh out. That's the alternative proposal based on our discussion from last time.
How much of a performance impact do you foresee for the platforms to have to validate against the build image, and then I guess same thing on the life cycle for the run image?
I think we could, if we do it during the builder creation time and add appropriate flags, the lifecycle could simply look for those flags and pass along. And the analysis phase validation could be fairly simple, but it would probably increase the amount of time it takes to create the builder, which ideally shouldn't impact build times, but just the builder creation time.
But it does, I mean, in a lot of build workflows, it could very well, like we create ephemeral or ad hoc builders, right? And so therefore that's kind of foreseen as part of the build time.
Yep. I think for those use cases, if we skip validation, we could potentially improve on the performance, but even then I can't say how much time it would take for us to verify that certain parts exist or do not exist. For once we are inside the builder container, verifying that a particular path is empty is fairly trivial. For the run image, I think that might be where we'll have to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, because I'm thinking like we'd have to look at all the layers on the image. I'm trying to think of whether or not they'd be compressed or not. So we might have to decompress them and then essentially look at the listing of the file system, right?
Yep. I think that would mainly be for the run image. For the build image, it should be fine, but the run image, I think, definitely would take a hit. The validation there.
Theoretically, the same like overriding the path on the run image problem exists with the way we do Apter right now, but it seems less important that it exists now because we have our default path for Apter is something that is highly unlikely to be set or relevant. Like we could just blow away what's on the run image if we wanted to be more optimistic.
I have a question about what happens if you have multiple build packs and they both declare the same directory. Is that okay? Because it's kind of like an app directory, or is that contract violation or something?
No, that's completely fine. It's treated like so all the semantics around the additional exported doors are exactly like the app directory. Nothing changes.
Got it. I like it.
I know a couple times we've talked about like actually tarring up layers in the build phase. I wonder if that becomes more tempting with this proposal as well, because I think it is a bit of a problem for platforms like Tecton to be mounting volumes to arbitrary paths. I don't want to put too much work on platforms to be able to execute a build. But, if we were layerizing in the build phase, we wouldn't actually need it to be a volume in order to succeed at this. We do if we're doing sort of like the layer restoring workflow, but we don't if it's sort of like the after style workflow, especially if it starts out empty and it's not, like populated for detection or anything like that.
The volumes also struck me as like not just hard for platforms to get everything set up, but once everything is set up, you might not expect opt to be on a volume. And so you might try to create a hard link to it, or you might expect move to be really fast because it's on the same file system. It is a little bit of a, allowing arbitrary paths to be volumes. Some tools aren't going to account for the fact that, it's not as they kind of expect the file system to look. So if we could move to a single volume or move to fewer volumes, tar earlier, and then move the tar balls onto the volumes that are shared, that seems like a big win to me.
For the single volume thing, if they're writing to paths that are not on the volume, would that impact the write performance?
Sorry, say that again. If they're writing to what?
Paths which are like not on a volume, would that slow down when they're writing files or directories on those paths?
Like,
It would typically be faster, right?
I guess it depends on the
Depends
on the
on what
underlying
kind of
story.
volume you're doing.
Yeah.
If it's like an empty dir style ephemeral volume, is probably about the same either way.
For Tecton, the other option was for us to symlink like the life cycle during one of the initial phases where it does have some privileged permissions could create the appropriate modifications to the builder image so that in the builder image they point to the same volume, and then Buildpacks write to that thing where it's preserved because it's on that single volume that was mounted.
Sorry if I take a step backwards, but could you remind me why we're using volumes as opposed to just standard file system? I remember something about ABI. Is that true?
It's just to preserve the contents written by the Buildpacks throughout the different phases.
Do we think all the volume shuffling is better than taking like a snapshot of these directories? Like, could we use something like a Canicode like snapshotter to, take a snapshot of the ops directory before any of the build phases occur, and then afterwards to create a layer that way and then apply it as we export?
I don't even think we need to do a snapshot thing. We can do exactly what our exporter does now when it's like layerizing and slicing the after. We could just do it at the end of the build phase after the build packs run, and then put that on the volume we already have. So you don't have to deal with sort of arbitrary volumes at arbitrary paths.
Snapshotting is expensive because you have to it's like trying to account for changes over time. And so it's what we do when we tar up individual layers as they are is a performance optimization over what Conoco would do.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how that would work with like doesn't Docker for desktop, for instance, when you do a volume, doesn't it like merge the volume, like /opt, or will it be empty? I guess it depends on how you do it.
Mounts
Yeah,
over
so-
it usually.
Yeah, it's like overlay, right? Yeah, or something. Yeah, I like this without the volume specific stuff. Like if we could turn it into exporting with our exporter, like that feels better to me than like relying on volumes to be a part of this.
How do we get around needing volumes for the, kind of sharing content across the phases?
We have a volume. Well, we have two right now. We have the apter and the layer stir. The layers stir, we're already talking about sort of architecting, so we can put more stuff in there. So it's just like when you
Mhm.
tar up the layers, you can put it on the volume we already have. And then because this is different from how we do other layers, like we don't need to restore anything during the restore phase here. We don't need to like copy in app contents in advance of detect. So the only place where we need to preserve changes in our current scheme is between build and export. But we don't really have to do the tarring during export. We just have. We could move where we do that to the end of the build phase and then just leave export for sort of like pushing it to a registry or putting it in the daemon.
Okay, I see. That makes sense. So, but that would make it a prerequisite that we move the tarring from export to build.
Yeah, which might be a good thing to do anyways. Like we've talked about other cases where that would be helpful. It's like, oh, do we want to try to parallelize it with the build stuff? But I feel like once it's in the builder phase, then we're free to like make all those changes later without it being a big deal, because it's not changing the interface for folks. So we could start just by, making it the last thing that happens during build. So basically everything's happening in the same order. It's just the phase boundary is different. If we did that, then I feel like we'd be in a good place to unblock some other stuff.
And to begin with, we could just make this specific thing happen at the end of build and kind of be the guinea pig for, what are the characteristics of having those tar files at the end of build and export getting them and handling them.
How does that make you feel, Sam? Just curious.
I mean, that makes sense to me. It also might open up the spike we have on the other RFC to test out what happens if we do that during the build, like if we parallelize the export during the build phase. So if it's just moving one function call from the export, well, simplifying things a bit, but if it's moving one thing from the export phase to the build phase, and then the rest of the process remains the same, that works.
Does I haven't thought it all the way through, but does that then change the performance concerns of what the platform will have to do as far as volumes are concerned of having to check the paths?
It would still have to if you want to ensure that there's nothing there. It's like the same guarantee we take with the app directory, where we assume there's nothing there on the run image on that path and we just overlay it on top. If you're fine with that assumption, then there shouldn't be any performance hit. If you want to validate that these paths are in fact empty, then yes, we'll have to verify that somewhere.
Makes sense.
If we just overlay these files on top of the run image, are there any security implications for doing something like that? Like, are there any paths that operators would need to deny up front or something, so they couldn't create something in some directory to cause a problem?
I think there's almost certainly malicious things a build pack could do in that case, right? But also, there's so many malicious things a build pack could do. I feel like you have to trust on some level that your build pack isn't malicious, because it can just put a malicious app in your app if it really wants to do that, right?
It might break some things in the run image if the build packs don't know what the run image expects or behaves, like the expected behavior for certain things on certain parts, and it overwrites them, then it might break some guarantees there. But yeah, it might not intentionally do malicious things, but it might unknowingly do them.
Might do weird things.
Like, I guess I do, leaning on what Jesse said, I do wonder if there needs to be a way, kind of like how right now the operator is able to say, like, you can't use this build pack, right? If there's a way that they can inspect the paths and say, okay, any build pack that tries to write to this directory basically can't be accepted. So I wonder at the end of the day if that really just means adding the paths to the metadata so that operators could, or platforms could let the operators also inspect that.
I think my original proposal was the reverse, where the run image would list out the paths that a build pack could write to. But we didn't like that because it coupled the stack with the build packs.
Yeah, but I think this one's different, right? The approach is you have a platform, at some enterprise, and basically, you have these like run images, and maybe you have some security, concepts that say nothing should be able to write to, user bin or something like that, right? Then they could kind of have those checks in place as long as the build packs themselves say these are the paths that I'm going to try to extract, right? And I think that still leaves that large amount of decoupling, because still the app developer or the other team could be able to choose whatever build packs they want and not necessarily worry too much about the run image, but it's more of a compliance thing that is put in place.
I mean, could you do that without extra metadata, but just with permissions? I guess you could do it with permissions on the build image, but it's about coordination between the build and run image. Like if the build pack user can't write somewhere, then it won't be able to write there, which is sort of within the stack author's control.
That's a good point. Like, yeah, maybe the existing access controls are sufficient for disallowing malicious code. If you really care, like if you have a credential helper or something that you want people to have access to, but you don't want someone to like replace it in a build pack and slurp up the credentials or something, then yeah, if you just prevent writing to that path in the first place, then it shouldn't be a problem. I don't think we put a time on these, but there's only one more left, but we are halfway through the meeting. Just time check.
Makes sense. Before we move on, a lot of the discussion's been about the kind of technical details of whether we could implement this, or what the different
You're gonna ask the
contracts
should
are.
be question.
Right. This is like one of 3 different proposals to kind of solve for this problem, which I think is a good problem to solve for. Or we do need to do something, I think. How do we feel about this, design wise, or more philosophically? is coupling it to the build pack versus the stack versus, in the app directory case, the user, right? Good idea, does it, create, does it create coupling with the stack, that's more implicit instead of explicit, like in the kind of first proposal? I think it does create some coupling with the stack, and that now a build pack has to know about paths in the stack that are pretty specific and relies on those paths being empty, right? Which is, I can see a situation where like a build pack says, oh, I'm going to write to opt because opt happens to be empty on this stack. And then somebody extends the stack with more things than opt, right? For their, because they needed an additional piece of software. It could even be a package that just happens to install something in opt, and now suddenly it doesn't build. Or I could see a situation where a hook installs something into opt, and then I guess we probably want a validation between the hooks and the build pack phase, right? Or, I worry a little bit about that particular coupling.
Well, I think opt would be too big of a scope to try to take in, right? I think that'd be like a failure of the build pack itself. In some of the use cases defined there, I think it's very specific directories with an opt. And that's the way I view it, because I think based on the use cases, it's things that make a lot more sense that are in predefined directories or expected directories. But I get what you're saying. I just wanted to, define that maybe it's not going to be as generic or general, and it's more very specific directories.
The example used opt though, right?
It could be like a sub-nested folder in opt.
And that would still work for your use case.
Yeah.
That makes sense. It definitely, I think, improves things, but it still would let you do opt, right?
It would, yeah. That's why I put it in there.
Makes sense. I don't have to come to a conclusion. I just wanted to kind of put that out there. Is I think the hard part about this is thinking about what we want to couple to what and how, right? So let's follow up with the apt writer proposal and then see which of the three we kind of like the best. All right, so we are at halftime, and the other proposal or other thing to talk about today was the name for whatever we call stack packs or hooks in the support Docker files RFC. I think we've resolved, unless happy to talk about anything else in there that is unresolved. I think we've resolved everything that's worth talking about during a working group. Sorry, Natalie, go ahead.
Oh yeah, sorry. I was thinking about this morning. The RFC mentions that I think it's both base images, but that they might have statically labeled provides that could be contributed to the build plan. And I started to think about, like, I know in stack packs, we had this concept of, I can provide any mixin, right? I know mixins are going away, but the idea that like a generic Docker file that's just like, I can just install whatever package is, provided to me as an argument. Like, is that gonna write? It's not gonna write in the build plan like every package out there, right? And so how do we reconcile that with like build packs potentially making requests via the build plan for some arbitrary packages?
Not sure I totally understood. So there's a provision in there for being able to like label a base image with, here's some provides that should always get matched, right? To requires the, and sorry, what are you?
Oh yeah, I think I had two questions
that
rolled into one. I had like an observation that prompted another question. So I'm really kind of getting at like the hooks communicating with build packs via the build plan. And the idea that Buildpacks could request some arbitrary package, right? And there could be a hook that's like, I can install any package. How does that communication happen in the build plan?
So there's no concept of packages anymore within the build plan, right? There's like, we don't have a mixins list or a packages list. It's just a communication contract. And so if a hook, like, are you asking like how would you implement an apt build pack?
Yeah, apt hook, yeah. That could just do anything,
I thought we had an example. Maybe there's not an example in there anymore. The requires can specify metadata that go to the provides. And so things requiring something from an apt build pack could pick a known build plan entry name and put require entries for the packages they want to install that would get received by the hook build pack. I think that was the.
You could
That's
like
a long-
require apt package and then in your metadata stick its name, something like that.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's helpful. That's helpful. And then, sorry, I had one more question. I think maybe this makes sense. If both base images, build and run, are able to statically provide something, when that goes into the build plan, is there any concept of like build, again, I know mixins are going away, but like build : this provide is on the build image, this provide is on the run image. Like, can we differentiate between the two?
I don't remember if provides are allowed to go on both of them or just on the run image one. It's been so long since I wrote that section. We've been through so many layers of review. Let me take a look. Just to remind myself.
I think the build plan entry could help here as well, right? Like you could still have apt, and then your metadata could be, I want curl on like run curl or something, and that would be a contract between you and the hook or whatever we're going to call it. At least that's the way I had it in my head of how that may work out.
So Jesse, you were imagining that it was on both images and they get combined.
Yeah, it'd be up to the hook, right? The hook contract. So instead of it being a contract that the lifecycle implements, it's really just the metadata contract between the hook and the build packs that are requesting that. And obviously, as a community, hopefully we would rally around like apt or something being the require, and then maybe we have a extension spec for how to, if you do curl, then it's for both. If you do build curl, it's one or the other.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess it doesn't say in the thing.
It's probably worth adding an example around this particular use case so that we can discuss it and get comments on it.
Yeah. Let me flesh that section out more. I wrote that at the very beginning and it's been in there without any comments on it for a long time. So I think is it okay if we move on to the kind of naming question?
Yeah, so this is helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I think at some point there were details there that were not written down. I should get them into the thing so we can talk about something that's more concrete, because I forget if it was that it should only be on one image or if there was a plan to resolve being on both images. Cool. So I think the kind of topic for what we put on the agenda today was that there are a little bit of an impasse over what we should call hooks. I think nobody is strongly attached to a particular name, but nobody is fully on board with the different names people have come up with so far. And so I wanted to kind of use this time to do a little bit of name generation, maybe, and see if we can come up with any names that have more broad consensus. And if we can't, maybe disqualify a couple of them or not, and just do a poll and come up with the most popular name. So we have some options listed there already. We come up with hooks, exts, froms. I don't know how that looks like, and or stage or stages. Does anybody want to talk about these existing things? Is there a plural version of from? Like, how do you talk about from?
I just grabbed these from the thread, so I don't have any context on them.
Hard to know on
Yeah,
any
I've got
names
it
we
open.
can't pluralize. I feel like we already have this problem with exec D. Like what are the exec Ds? It's not even like a name for a thing that we can use. It's just the name of a directory.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think Javier is correcting stage to staging. I think that might have the same problem, is that what we picked is staging and not, we call them stagings or something.
Yeah, and I think the term comes from Docker, where they use stage and stages versus staging.
Makes sense. Maybe if folks who came up with those ideas do have opinions, want to add different or like examples of how you use the name in there, that'd be good. But also, does anybody have other suggestions for names besides these 4 things?
Coming in a little green, but has anybody proposed provider or providers?
So we can put that down there. I think it's similar to provide, or we have a build plan concept called provides. It's a little similar to that, but the I don't think overlap there would be terrible. The functionality again, for folks who haven't been following super closely to this, is the ability to run Docker files on your build before the normal build packs run and install stuff into the contractually defined layers. And so I picked hooks kind of arbitrarily because they're like, it's a thing that runs before the build happens or something. But it doesn't quite get it across. They used to be called stack packs. I see Sam extenders. Example there.
Add-ons as well. Pretty generic, but it's well known what it does, basically.
Is it well known what it does? I'm not
Well,
sure.
it's
add-ons-
generically, yeah, it's a pretty generic word, but we're not inventing words, so I don't know.
Feel free to keep putting them in the Slack chat or say aloud here, or just drop it in the doc under the list. Maybe I'll leave 3 minutes of silent generation. Is in it a different suggestion than initializer?
No, I think it was just alternative there. I just put it in there. It's a short one. I know we don't like long directory names, so I think it's for me directory names.
Can I flatten it so that if they're different suggestions, yeah.
The way I was interpreting it, which is clearly wrong, based on what people are saying, is that the short nested ones were the names for the directory. And the other one was like the word we'd use other places.
Yeah, that's what I thought as well when I was doing the top ones.
So initializers go in the init directory.
Was that the suggestion, Jesse?
Yeah, that was mine. I didn't suggest
Okay.
initializers, so I was hesitant to say, but that's what I was thinking. Is init would be the directory.
Cool. I saw snaps under snapshots. Was that the same thing, or was snaps?
Nope. That's what I was thinking.
suggestion.
Well, that's why I put the question mark, because it wasn't me who put snapshots there.
Got it. Trying to keep the different suggestions separate. All right, we're at about 3 minutes. Anybody still thinking? Cool. Should we do a informal, sort of unofficial round of voting here with the folks in the group, just to see where if there are names that people like, and then if we can't decide on anything we really like, then we'll go to a poll, maybe the top, I don't know, 10 or something.
I could create the comments for voting. I think we've done that in the past.
Say again?
I can create the comments for voting. I think that's how we would do it, right? Yeah.
Got it. In the doc,
We all just put our initials like at the front, like if I wanted this one, I could say, NA, and then you can easily visually see which ones have the most votes.
because the comments you have to kind of click through.
Yeah, the comments, it's so confusing. I don't know.
I'm cool with that, but let's put them at the end of the name, not the front. How about
Oh, the front, because then you can easily see which ones
that?
get
Okay,
the most.
fine, Natalie.
How many votes do you want per person? No strong opinions.
I think just as many things as you actually like. It's fine, because we're gonna do a formal vote later anyways, right? Like if you'd be
Yeah,
kind of
okay.
okay with it, vote for it.
Yeah, put your initials in front. That's a good idea, because they're not. It's not a vote for approval. Put your initials in front if you like the suggestion. Go. Give people 30 more seconds to kind of finalize their initials. I don't think I've seen a vote from everybody, so please don't hesitate to express your opinion if you have one. All right, seems like things have settled down a bit. I see some questions in the chat. Natalie, you want to talk about your comment?
Oh, I feel like this came up before, but extend, it could be extending the build image prior to the build, or it could also be extending the result of the build prior to export, and just, I don't know, maybe in that case we would have CNB extensions pre, CNB extensions post or something, but it would just be another directory change.
We don't recall those hooks.
Couldn't we just change the binary name, like under ext/ you have a pre or post binary or whatever?
Yeah, I think if anything, I like the flexibility of extensions, being able to, if we want to do some post-processing, we could do so at a later point. Whereas like with staging, I was conflicted because we wouldn't be able to do that, right? Staging kind of means upfront.
My concern is satisfied.
Emily, you had a question about stage?
Yeah, for calling these things a stage, they generate Docker files. I think at one point we said they could generate a multi-stage Docker file. My question was, is it a multi-stage stage then? I feel like it might actually just get confusing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Definitely some of the words here are pretty generic.
I'd rather go with something that's like hand wavy generic, where we can sort of define it ourselves rather than something that's trying to be too analogous to something like snapshot or stage, which is a very specific meaning in Docker files if we're not using the exact same literal meaning.
I was pretty conflicted about snapshot. So mine.
Yeah, what about initializers? The init, I think that kind of helps tie in with maybe the K8s ecosystem a little bit too. And that would be a little bit prescriptive to it being a pre-process. So I think between those, the extensions and initializers, if we wanted to be generic, we could do extensions. If we wanted to be prescriptive to the idea of a pre-process, initializers.
I really liked initializers, but for some of them, I also kind of like the word adapter also in some ways, but the things I worry about for those is that they don't imply any changes necessarily, or like, if I think about like an init container in K8s or like an initialization stage, I don't think of that as like something that modifies a base image extensively, right? Like an init container in K8s, it's a container that runs ahead of time, but there doesn't persist any changes. It's just like a step for initialization. And like adapter, what is it adapting, right?
Adapting the stack to suit your needs.
They seem like really good words. I just couldn't get the semantic meaning out of them that corresponds with the, what's happening.
For me, it was like the initializers do the appropriate changes or run the appropriate things before the build process starts. And then if we have the post build component, it would be called finalizers, or if we add that. But if it's extensions, then it's pre and post, similar to hooks.
It is
think
nice.
I think initializers is like straight up dangerously close to what init containers do without having anything to do with them. So I'm really -1 on initializers for that reason.
Interesting. So you think it would imply something happens at runtime?
Yeah, yeah. I think it implies completely the wrong thing. I agree. Like, I think stage has a similar problem, but at least we're like in the realm of building images, where I mean, init containers have nothing to do with that, and I think it's like, I think it implies like, oh yeah, if I put something here, it's gonna give me like an init container or something.
I was going to bring up the extensions. One of the kind of hesitations I have with that name has to do with the idea that we have extension specs. And I know that in the past, we've talked about potentially putting a directory somewhere that basically has like extension related artifacts. And, if we do that, then it would be very confusing to have extensions, and extensions mean different things within the file system.
Rename extension specs to something else.
Yeah,
This
I was
is
gonna
more
say
boring.
that's like super easy to fix because nobody knows what an extension spec is. So we can call that whatever.
Call that adapters.
Init specs.
It seems like the only one that nobody has expressed some lack or some particular offense at and has popular support is extensions. Does anybody want to say something negative about extensions? Again, we don't have to decide here. We can do a vote later. I just want to talk through all the options.
People are worried about extension specs. We could go with the extenders version instead of the extensions version.
Sounds like a life cycle phase.
Wait, it's not?
Yeah, that's true. We probably would want to call that lifecycle phase extender. The one that runs on the run image, right? Ugh. Let's just do one of the ones that no one actually likes, but no one hates either. I vote prime merge now.
All right, we are.
Prime. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say we're at and now over time. Hopefully this has been helpful to think about some names. We should do a kind of more formal poll after this because I don't think we're going to get to consensus on one thing in particular. All right, thanks.